obviously, it's one. And then all the people that I've met and got close with throughout the years.
Jordan, my grandma.
Jordan DeMay was a high school senior in Marquette, Michigan. He played football, he played basketball. He was the kind of kid teachers describe as the one everybody liked, not because he tried to be, but because he just was. He had a girlfriend, he had college offers on the table, he had by every account from the people who knew him a future. On March 24th, 2022, a girl messaged him on Instagram. She said her name was Dani Robertts. She said they had mutual friends. She sent photos. She seemed real because everything about the way she talked, the way she flirted, the way she pushed was built by people who had done this more than 100 times before. 6 hours later, Jordan was dead. The girl wasn't a girl. She wasn't even one person. She was a hacked Instagram account operated by two brothers sitting in Lagos, Nigeria, running a script they'd run on over 100 other victims, boys as young as 14, men in their 20s, all across the United States. What happened to Jordan that night wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was a business model, and it's a business model the FBI says has exploded by more than 1,000% in just a few years. This is the story of how a hacked account and a fake photo became a 6-hour countdown to a teenager's death, and how investigators tracked that account across an ocean through a country that had never before extradited anyone for a crime like this, to two brothers who thought they were untouchable. If you're new here, this channel covers real cases, investigations, trials, and the people left behind. If this story matters to you, subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Before we go further, this case involves the suicide of a minor. We're not going to sensationalize that. We're going to tell you what happened and why it matters. Because Jordan's own mother has spent the last several years making sure his story gets told. If you or someone you know is struggling, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is free, confidential, and available right now by call or text. Stay with us. To understand why this case became a turning point in how the United States prosecutes online crime, you have to start with where Jordan was from, because it matters. Marquette, Michigan sits on the edge of Lake Superior, in a region locals just call the UP, the Upper Peninsula. It's remote. It's the kind of place where winters are brutal and communities are tight, where everybody's kid plays on the same handful of sports teams and the high school football games are a town event. It is about as far, in every sense, from Lagos, Nigeria, as 2 points on the same planet can be. That distance is going to matter a lot later in this story. Jordan DeMay grew up in that world. He was a senior at Marquette Senior High School, where he played both football and basketball. People who knew him describe an athletic, well-liked kid, the kind of homecoming king energy that comes from being genuinely easy to be around, not performed. He had plans. College was on the table. He had a girlfriend. He had, in every visible way, the ordinary, promising life of a Midwestern teenager heading into his last months of high school. None of that mattered to the people who found him on Instagram. On March 24th, 2022, Jordan got a message from an account using the handle Dani Robertts. Whoever was behind that account claimed to be a girl, claimed they had mutual friends, and started talking to him the way any teenager talks to someone they are interested in. The conversation moved fast. It got flirtatious. Then it got sexual. Marquette County Sheriff Greg Zybert later said something that stands out because it shows Jordan wasn't naive. He was suspicious and he asked. At one point, mid-conversation, he typed out a question to Dani. Is this a scam? The account told him no, and he believed it because the account had already done the work to make itself believable, sending its own photos, building a rapport, playing the part of a real, interested teenage girl. So Jordan sent an explicit photo of himself. Sheriff Zybert's words on what happened next. That's when everything changed instantly. The moment the photo was sent, the tone of the conversation flipped completely. The person on the other end stopped being a flirty stranger and became a threat. They told Jordan they had his photo, they had his followers, they had his friends and family. And unless he paid them, they were going to send it to everyone he knew until it went viral. The number they demanded was $1,000. Jordan didn't have $1,000. He was a high school senior, but he tried. His parents would later learn that he sent the extortionist more than $300, scraping together what he could from his own accounts, hoping it would be enough to make the threat stop. It didn't stop, it got worse. For the next several hours, the messages kept coming, countdown threats, escalating pressure. According to his mother, Jennifer Buta, the people on the other end of that conversation knew exactly what they were doing to him, applying constant psychological pressure on a teenager who was alone, panicking, and increasingly convinced there was no way out. At some point in those final hours, Jordan sent his mother a text. It read, "Mother, I love you." She was asleep. She didn't see it until morning. When she read it later, she would describe it as what she thought, at the time, was just an endearing random message from her son, the kind of thing you don't think twice about. It wasn't until afterward that she understood what it actually was: a goodbye. On March 25th, 2022, within 6 hours of that first explicit photo being sent, Jordan DeMay died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in his home. His parents had no idea any of this had happened until after his death. They didn't know about Dani Robertts. They didn't know about the threats, the countdown, the $300. They found out the same way investigators eventually pieced the whole picture together, by going through his phone. What they found wasn't the story of a troubled kid in crisis. It was the story of a kid who, 6 hours earlier, had been doing what millions of teenagers do every single day, talking to someone on Instagram. The only difference was who was actually on the other end. Here's the part of this story that the FBI wants people to understand, because it's the part that turns Jordan's death from an isolated horror into a documented, ongoing epidemic. Dani Robertts wasn't a one-time scam improvised by some bored teenager. It was a single thread in an industrial-scale operation. Investigators would eventually trace the account back to Lagos, Nigeria, and to two brothers, Samuel Ogoshi, 22 at the time, and his younger brother Samson Ogoshi, 20. They weren't acting alone. Court documents would later tie them to a third Nigerian national, Ezekiel Robert, and to a separate network of US-based men who laundered the proceeds. But the Ogoshi brothers were the ones actually behind the keyboard the night Jordan died, and their operation followed a method investigators say has now been used on thousands of victims across the country. Here's how it worked, according to the plea agreements the brothers later signed. Step 1. Buy access, not build it. The Ogoshis didn't create fake profiles from scratch and slowly build them up to look real. That takes too long and looks suspicious. Instead, they purchased already hacked Instagram accounts. These accounts belong to real people, often young women with real photos, real friend networks, and real follower histories already built in. That history is what makes an account look legitimate to a target within seconds of opening a conversation. There's a real person's life already documented in the feed. Step 2. Research the target. Before they ever sent a message, the Ogoshis and their co-conspirators used Google and the target's own social media to learn about him. His school, his friends, his interests, the things he'd want a girl to already seem to know. This is what made the early conversation feel organic instead of scripted. When Dani claimed to have mutual friends with Jordan, that wasn't a guess, it was research. Step 3. Build trust fast, then escalate. The conversation would start friendly, move to flirtatious, and accelerate towards sexual content far faster than a real teenage relationship typically would. Because speed was the entire point. The scammers weren't trying to build a relationship. They were trying to get one piece of leverage as fast as possible. Step 4. Extract the image, then strike immediately. The moment a victim sent an explicit photo, the account's tone would change instantly, exactly as Sheriff Zybert described with Jordan. In some cases, the scammers didn't just threaten with the original photo. Court documents say they used the image combined with other photos pulled from the victim's own social media to produce composite collages, making the threat feel even more inescapable, even more documented, even more real. Step 5. Countdown, panic, repeat. Once the threat landed, the scammers applied constant pressure, messages, deadlines, threats to contact family, friends, classmates, followers. They weren't running one conversation. According to the indictment, they were running this exact pipeline on more than 100 victims simultaneously across the country, treating each one as a transaction to be closed before the target had time to think, call a parent, or call the police. And in case after case, it worked. Because the entire design of the scheme depended on shame and panic outpacing judgment. A scared 17-year-old alone at night isn't thinking about reporting a crime. He's thinking about a photo reaching his football team, his girlfriend, his mom. The scale of what investigators eventually uncovered is staggering. Plea agreements would later confirm that from before February 2021 through January 2023, the Ogoshis and their co-conspirators ran this scheme on more than 100 identified victims. At least 11 of them were minors. One was as young as 15, and money moved exactly like a business. Investigators alleged the Nigerian-based scammers worked with 5 US-based men located in Georgia and Alabama who controlled financial accounts on the receiving end of the extortion payments. When a victim like Jordan sent money, that cash didn't sit in Nigeria waiting. According to prosecutors, the US-based men would receive the funds, keep a cut for themselves, then convert the remainder into Bitcoin and route it to an unindicted Nigerian co-conspirator, who then funneled it back to the people running the scam. It was money laundering built specifically to move sextortion payments across borders fast enough that by the time anyone thought to trace them, the money was already gone. This is the system that targeted Jordan DeMay. He wasn't unlucky, he wasn't careless, he was one name in a pipeline built to process boys exactly like him as quickly and as profitably as possible. And on the other side of the world, completely unaware that one of their 100-plus targets had just killed himself, the operation kept running. There's a detail from the investigation that captures just how little remorse existed on the other end of that conversation. After Jordan's death made local news, Samuel Ogoshi didn't go quiet, and he didn't go to police. According to his own plea agreement, he went to Google. His search history from that period, later recovered by investigators, included terms like Michigan suicide, is suicide a sin, Instagram blackmail death, and how can FBI track my IP from another country. He wasn't horrified that a 17-year-old was dead. He was trying to figure out if he was going to get caught. This is the part of the story that makes Jordan DeMay's case different from almost every other sextortion case before it. Because for once, the people behind the screen didn't get away with it. When Jordan died on March 25, 2022, the Marquette County Sheriff's Department was handling what looked on its face like a tragic teen suicide. There was no obvious crime scene pointing to a third party, no physical evidence of an intruder, just a phone and a family with no idea why. The break came almost immediately and almost by coincidence of timing. Sheriff Zybert's detectives began working with the FBI and discovered that just one day before Jordan's death, the FBI had issued a press release warning specifically about an explosive rise in sextortion cases targeting minors. Investigators recognized the pattern the moment they looked at Jordan's phone. They subpoenaed his social media records. What came back was the entire conversation, the friendly opening, the flirtation, the photo, and then the 6-hour collapse into threats and panic. It was all there, preserved exactly as it happened, because digital extortion leaves a trail that a gun does not. From there, the case became a joint operation. The FBI, the Marquette County Sheriff's Department, and the Michigan State Police Cybercrimes Unit started working the digital trail together, and that trail led overseas. Investigators tracked the IP address behind Dani Robertts back to Nigeria, a country authorities say has become, along with the Ivory Coast and the Philippines, one of the major operating bases for sextortion rings targeting American teenagers. This is where the case could have died, the way so many before it had. For years, international sextortion operations had functioned with something close to impunity. The victims were in the US. The scammers were overseas, often in countries without strong extradition cooperation with American law enforcement, and without domestic laws aggressive enough to prosecute the crime, even if local police wanted to. Predators knew this. It was, functionally, part of the business model. Operate from a jurisdiction where the FBI's reach effectively stopped at the border. But this case didn't stop at the border because US investigators didn't let it. FBI agents from Michigan traveled directly to Nigeria to conduct a joint investigation with Nigerian law enforcement, specifically the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, Nigeria's EFCC, the agency that handles financial crime and fraud cases domestically. This wasn't the FBI working alone and hoping a foreign government would eventually hand someone over. This was boots on the ground cooperation between two countries' law enforcement agencies. Built specifically to identify and locate Samuel Ogoshi, Samson Ogoshi, and their associate Ezekiel Roberts. In May 2023, a federal grand jury in Michigan returned an indictment, formally charging the Ogoshi brothers and Robert with the sexual exploitation of minors. Samuel Ogoshi was charged with something far more serious than the others, causing the death of Jordan Demay. Under federal sentencing guidelines, that charge alone carried a mandatory minimum of 30 years if convicted at trial. But an indictment sitting in a Michigan courthouse means nothing if the men it names are sitting in Lagos outside US jurisdiction. The next step was the hardest one, actually getting them. In January 2023, even before the formal indictment was unsealed, Nigerian authorities, acting at the request of the United States, arrested Samuel and Samson Ogoshi, along with Ezekiel Roberts. This is where the case became historic. The U.S. Department of Justice's Office of International Affairs, working alongside the U.S. State Department, formally transmitted an extradition request to the Nigerian government. Nigerian prosecutors then took on the extradition proceedings themselves, arguing the case through Nigeria's own court system on behalf of the United States. On July 20th, 2023, a Nigerian judge, Justice B. F. M. Nyako, ordered both Ogoshi brothers turned over to the United States to face the charges in the Michigan indictment. On August 3rd, Nigeria's Solicitor General signed the final surrender order. 10 days later, on August 13th, 2023, Samuel and Samson Ogoshi landed at Gerald R. Ford International Airport in Grand Rapids, Michigan, extradited in handcuffs of the same kind of digital trail they thought was untraceable. According to court records, this was the first time in history that Nigerian nationals had been extradited to the United States specifically to face charges in a sextortion case. Not money laundering, not wire fraud, sextortion, the exact crime that, for years, predators had treated as effectively consequence-free across that border. U.S. Attorney Mark Totten, who led the prosecution, didn't soften what that meant. He said the case sent a message to every criminal or would-be criminal around the world that wherever they are, the US will chase them down and hold them accountable. The brothers were arraigned in Grand Rapids and pleaded not guilty. A third man, Ezekiel Roberts, remained in Nigeria, appealing his own extradition order through the Nigerian High Court, a process that would continue separately for years. Meanwhile, on the financial side of the case, the investigation kept widening. Federal prosecutors unsealed a separate indictment against 5 US-based men from Georgia and Alabama, accused of laundering the extortion proceeds, the men allegedly converting victims' payments into Bitcoin and routing them back overseas. Some of those men, including Kendall London Jr. of Georgia and Dinsmore Guyton Robinson of Alabama, would later plead guilty in their own separate proceedings, each facing up to 2 decades in prison for their role in moving the money that fueled the scheme. What had started as a single grieving family in Marquette, Michigan had become a multinational law enforcement operation spanning 2 countries, 2 federal court districts, and at least 7 defendants, all traced back to one hacked Instagram account and one 6-hour conversation that ended a 17-year-old's life. By April 2024, both Ogoshi brothers had reversed their original not guilty pleas, facing the weight of the evidence, the preserved Instagram conversation, the financial trail, the more than 100 documented victims, Samuel's own search history trying to figure out if he could be tracked. Both brothers pleaded guilty to conspiring to sexually exploit teenage minors. The sentencing hearing took place on September 5th, 2024, in federal court in Marquette, Michigan, in the same community Jordan was from. U.S. Attorney Mark Totten didn't mince words about what the brothers had done. He told the court that Samuel and Samson Ogoshi were part of a scheme that even encouraged Jordan Dime to take his own life when he could no longer give them money, a detail that underscores something prosecutors emphasized throughout the case. This wasn't just financial predation that happened to end in tragedy. The pressure applied to victims was specifically designed to escalate past the point of rational decision-making, and the brothers continued applying it even as Jordan, hour after hour, showed every sign of a teenager in crisis. Jordan's mother, Jennifer Buta, addressed the court directly. She told the defendants and everyone in that courtroom that she was, in her words, shattered to the core, infuriated, and trapped in grief. She described what she now understood had actually happened that night. Not a private struggle, but a deliberate, hours-long campaign. She told the court that what she'd once read as an endearing, ordinary text from her son, "Mother, I love you," she now understood was his goodbye and his reassurance of his love for her, sent while, in her words, both defendants hid behind their screens and tortured Jordan for hours while he was alone. She didn't describe 2 random scammers who got lucky. She described 2 people who, according to her, deliberately played on her son's vulnerabilities with no regard for his life, who used relentless threats in a countdown specifically designed to terrify a teenager into believing he had no way out except the one he took. Other members of Jordan's family gave victim impact statements as well, telling the defendants directly that what they'd stolen went beyond money. They'd stolen the family's joy. When it came time for sentencing, Federal Judge Robert Juncker handed down 210 months, 17 and a half years, in federal prison for each brother, followed by 5 years of supervised release upon their eventual release. The charge they pleaded guilty to carried a mandatory minimum of 15 years, with a maximum of 30. Prosecutors had pushed for a sentence reflecting the scale and cruelty of the operation. The court landed at 17.5 years for each man. Outside the federal courthouse afterward, Totten stood with Jordan's mother, father, and stepmother and called the day historic, not just for Jordan's family, but for sextortion prosecution as a whole. He said it sent a message to every criminal or would-be criminal anywhere in the world that there had long been a sense in countries like Nigeria that predators could commit these crimes and walk away from any consequence, that you could hound victims, pretend to be someone you're not, demand money, encourage people to take their own lives and remain essentially untouchable. What happened in that Michigan courtroom, he said, was proof that wasn't true anymore. The third defendant in the case, Ezekiel Robert, remained in Nigeria at the time of the Ogoshi brothers' sentencing, still appealing his own extradition through Nigeria's court system, a separate legal fight that would continue well beyond his co-conspirator's conviction. For Jennifer Buta, the sentencing wasn't an ending. It was, by her own description, the start of a mission to make sure no other family went through what hers had. Jordan Dime's case didn't end with 2 brothers in federal prison. It became one of the clearest examples in the country of how sextortion has evolved into an industrialized transnational crime, and how the systems meant to stop it are only just beginning to catch up. The numbers behind this epidemic are staggering. The FBI has reported roughly a 10-fold increase in sextortion cases since 2021. The same year the Ogoshi brothers scheme was getting underway. Investigators say at least 3,000 children and teenagers have been targeted by financially motivated sextortion schemes, and more than a dozen have died by suicide as a direct result. Many of these schemes, according to US authorities, are believed to originate from organized networks based in Nigeria and the Ivory Coast, operations that treat American teenagers as a renewable, anonymous, cross-border revenue stream. Jordan's mother turned her grief into advocacy almost immediately. Jennifer Buta has spoken publicly, repeatedly about her son's case, not to relive the worst night of her life for its own sake, but because she said directly that financial sextortion is the fastest growing crime against teenagers in the country. And that real change only happens when someone is actually held accountable for what's happening to these kids. That advocacy had concrete results. In Michigan, lawmakers passed what's now known as Jordan's Law, 2 bills specifically targeting sextortion. One establishes harsher penalties for anyone who threatens to release explicit material against a victim's will. The other creates tiered sentencing guidelines for sexual extortion, specifically with escalating consequences for repeat offenders. Michigan legislators who sponsored the bills said directly that the goal was prevention, starting the kind of conversations and education that might stop the next case before it starts. At the federal level, the case contributed to broader legislative momentum as well. In May 2024, President Biden signed a bipartisan bill requiring online platforms to report violations involving the online sexual exploitation of children directly to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, closing a gap that for years had let cases like Jordan's slip through platform-level moderation entirely. The FBI has also used Jordan's case repeatedly as a public warning, a way to make a statistic feel like what it actually is, a real kid with a real family who had no idea the danger he was in until it was already too late. The guidance to parents and teenagers is consistent and worth repeating plainly. Be careful what you share online, because a stranger can learn more about you from your own posts than you'd expect. Block and ignore messages from people you don't actually know. A photo or video sent to you isn't proof of who someone really is. Accounts get hacked and stolen constantly, and nothing you send disappears. Not a message, not a photo. Once it's sent, you don't control where it goes next. If something feels wrong, the answer isn't to handle it alone. Block the person, report it to the platform, and tell an adult immediately, not after trying to manage it yourself. That last point is, in many ways, the most painful part of Jordan's case. He wasn't a kid who ignored every warning sign. He directly asked Dani Robertts if it was a scam. Investigators believe that single question and the convincing no he received in response may have been the last real chance to stop what was coming. He didn't tell his parents. He tried to solve it himself in the middle of the night, alone, against people who had already done this to 100 other people and knew exactly which buttons to push. That's the gap Jordan's family is trying to close now, not just through prosecutions an ocean away, but through a simple message they want every parent and every teenager to actually hear. If this happens to you, the photo is not the end of your life. Telling someone is not the humiliation. The way out is reaching out to a parent, to the police, to the FBI's tip line, not paying and not staying silent. Samuel and Samson Ogoshi are currently serving 17 and a half years each in federal prison for a scheme that authorities say targeted more than 100 victims, including at least 11 minors, and directly led to the death of a 17-year-old boy from Marquette, Michigan, who they never met, never knew, and viewed as nothing more than a name on a list. Jordan DeMay's last conscious act, as far as anyone close to him can tell, was reassuring his mother that he loved her, in the middle of being, in her words, tortured by 2 strangers hiding behind a screen on the other side of the world. His case became the first time Nigerian nationals were ever extradited to the United States specifically to face sextortion charges. It changed Michigan law. It contributed to federal legislation. It's been used by the FBI repeatedly as the case that finally made the scale of this epidemic impossible to ignore. None of that brings Jordan back. His mother has said as much herself, but it means that what happened to him is now, on the record, a crime with consequences, in a space where, for a long time, predators operated as if there were none. If this story affected you, or if you recognize any part of what happened to Jordan in a conversation you or someone you know is having right now, please don't wait. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is free and confidential by call or text 24 hours a day. And if you believe you or someone you know is being targeted by sextortion right now, the FBI's tip line is open at tips.fbi.gov or by calling 1-800-CALL-FBI. If this case moved you, subscribe for more of these investigations and let me know in the comments what you think should happen to the third defendant still fighting extradition in Nigeria. Thanks for watching.